I think we should really stick with that bit. I think it's really good.
Oh, yeah?
I enjoy it.
I know you do. I'm not sure if anyone else.
That's totally fair too. But then again, this is our show. So
we can do whatever the fuck we want.
And that was one of our personal favorites here on the radio channel by George Michael. Great tune indeed. You're listening to your favorite radio channel, K96.1. Tonight on our show, Velveteen Hour, with me, your host, Alex Cummings, and my co-host, Nick Backslap. We're here to listen to some sweet tunes and think only sexy thoughts. On today's program, we're sitting down, having a fika, talking about this week's spicy movie. From the visionary director who brought you Starship Troopers, Total Recall, and RoboCop. You know who it is, it's Paul Verhoeven. We're talking about Basic Instinct. It's gonna be a good show. What do you think? Nick Backslap? Are you excited or what?
Good morning, Alex. Yeah, thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here for the Velvet Hour. One more time, we're here for the fans. We're here for the love. Monday through Thursday, 5 to 7.
Everything for the love. Always for the love. We're gonna play you a short tune, and then we'll be back with the talk of the spicy movie of the week.
No need to ask, he's a smooth operator. Smooth operator.
I think that was pretty good. I think you held it up. I'm very impressed. The first second there, you sounded a little bit more like the radio host of a horror show. But it's a fine line.
It goes hand in hand.
Yeah,
more or less so. I'm here. I thought that since last week I had a Danish or a Wienerbrød, I was going to follow up the Danish tradition. So I have a mandelkub today. One of my favorites, honestly. Like mandelkub is always has a dear place in my heart. Just
I'm so sorry for the people that don't actually watch the podcast and only hear it. And they're like, man, that guy says some weird shit sometimes.
Oh, so they can't see me and see my stupid face? What do you mean? What are you trying to say?
I mean, like, we can't put in like subtitles or something, you know?
Oh. Well, mandelkub should be common sense. I feel bad for you since you probably never had a mandelkub. Or a proper Danish, for that matter. We were looking for one in Sweden, but never could find one.
We had a proper Danish.
It was okay. It was a Swedish Danish. If you go to Denmark and having pølse there compared to a Swedish pølse, it's not the same. It's not the same.
You're right.
But of course, Danes are only speaking a garbage language by garbage people. But what do they say?
I think that's what they say, yeah.
We speak very many languages except for Danish because it's a garbage language spoken by garbage people. Good one.
Oh, the Danes. So I was talking to a friend of mine that lives in Europe, actually, and she did not know about the rivalry between you guys and the Danes.
Oh, yeah.
You guys being the Swedes. And she didn't believe me. She was like, no, I think your friend, he was like just fucking with you. And I was like, there's a bit in a TV show about it. All right. That's all the confirmation I need in my life.
No, it's something about Denmark. So shout out to all my fellow Danes, but you suck. You make good pastries, though. Gotta say.
I actually don't know if we have any listeners in Denmark. As of yet.
Well,
maybe this is the reason why there's no Denmark listeners.
No, I was gonna say,
stupid face.
I'm gonna make sure to shoo them away if they ever appear, because nobody needs Danes. Sweden has literally been in war with Denmark for, well, multitudes of years. So we have history. So there are reasons for the hate. Nowadays, it's more tame than that, but it's still there. It's still bubbling. You can tell your friend that you know better than her, and that I know better than you, and that Danes are garbage people spoken by a garbage language. anything
Preach.
anything new with you, or how are you today, or have you felt it out yet, or
No, it's very early. I personally did not want to be here at this time of the morning, mostly because it's ungodly to be up before the sun is up. But like Nikki Backslap once said, we're here for the fans, we're here for the love.
one love?
No, I'm excited. I'm excited about this movie. I think there's something about erotic thrillers that kind of define an era, and I want to know your input on this for some reason.
I'm honestly a bit terrified. Is a bit extreme to say, but some sort of sweet spot of like mildly electrifying fright of speaking about this movie, of like it's an older film and it has a very strong male audience. Let's say it just makes sense that one of these films wouldn't be made today for obvious reasons.
Yeah. Here's the thing though about this type of film. Apparently when they used to come out, and I'll tell you more about it once we actually start talking about the film, but there was a huge male and female appeal for this type of movie. That's why Michael Douglas did like fucking a bajillion of them, because he was the dude that a lot of the ladies liked. So he's like in a bunch of them.
And I guess that the same audience or the same type of movie is seen today in something like 50 Shades of Grey. I mean, the appeal of that sort of film is always gonna be seemingly just in different forms.
Agreed. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll talk more about it. There's lots to uncover, quite literally, if I may say so.
Yeah. What about you? How are you doing?
I'm doing better. I don't have much going for me, but it's still going. Well, that's the widest thing to say, but it's going. I have been, since Netflix started releasing, I think every or most of the Studio Ghibli movies, I've been working my way through the entire filmography of Miyazaki. Well, not truly.
Nice.
I'm halfway there of what Netflix has to offer, and it's a blast. Usually, me and my sister is sitting there just in awe of, first of all, how beautifully it's animated, and straight up stories. There's a lot of them that I missed as a kid, but some would argue that Studio Ghibli movie is very likely better as an adult, right? At least some of them. Like, for example, I saw Princess Mononoke, and that one is pretty gruesome. I don't even know what the PG rating is for that, but there's like limbs being chopped off, and I can see how, as a kid, you would be, mortified by seeing that. But that's a good sign in an animated film, that it appeals to multiple age groups.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think it was a really smart move of them to finally just kind of come into the digital streaming space, because everyone who knows about them or who's heard about them but for some reason or another hadn't watched these films, now they really don't have any excuse, because Netflix is just really accessible. I think if animation is underrated and if animation is overlooked by a lot of people, Japanese animation is even more so, because there's all this like stigma around the anime kind of community and look. And I think that these films, like the Studio Ghibli films, suffer a lot from that kind of view that a lot of people have about it.
And it's really that, where my mom is just walking in the room and I was like, oh, it's that Japanese manga, she says. And I'm like, it's not manga. And she's whatever, and walks away. So it's just the style is off-putting to so many people, and I don't really understand them. But You do you, I guess.
Well, you have to understand that when Japan started exporting a lot of these things like Pokemon and the very few anime that became kind of mainstream in the West, a lot of people were freaked out about it.
Yeah.
There was a lot of religious groups that were against them, and they were definitely not as, let's call them, family friendly.
Yeah.
As certain like cartoons were over here. So,
But it's just a matter of cultural difference. And
yeah, for sure.
Granted, nowadays there's less of a difference necessarily, or more of an acceptance as well.
Yeah, I think the problem is that there's so many ideas that we have stuck with in regards to a whole bunch of shit.
Oh yeah.
that kind of need to start changing, and hopefully, at least from what I see, there's people who are willing to go ahead and start that change as well. And I think that's the most we can ask from people, I guess. Which, yeah,
I don't know. It's getting there. Even though the Oscars is extremely political, the fact that a foreign movie won recently is one step in the right direction. Unfortunately, it's a slow ass process. I've been thinking quite a bit about canceling Netflix though, because it's Netflix. First of all, Netflix is difficult. It is difficult to find movies and shows that are not Netflix original, because naturally they would advertise. The algorithm works in the favor of Netflix original productions. That makes sense. But come on, I don't want to watch mostly that, because that is literally what you're putting on the feed. Regardless, Netflix is not too great with giving you multiple options. It's just and makes me wonder if their library is declining in quality, or maybe it's just me who's picky. I have HBO now, and they have quite some good movies. I'm not too interested in shows, as that you're well aware of. But I'm straight up thinking if I should just cancel it all and just stick with renting movies for a while, or if there's any other service out there that it's worth looking into just for a month or so. What's your what do you call it? What's your idea of streaming services, and what do you subscribe to? Would you rather subscribe to all of them and have everything accessible, or do one a month that I know some people do? It's better for the wallet, but you have to literally cancel the subscription every month and start a new one on a new service. And on top of that, finish your show that you were watching on HBO during that month.
Yeah, I think when it comes to streaming services, I really enjoy. So I like physical media a lot, as you can probably see. For those of you who are on the YouTubes, but I like the ease of accessibility that digital media gives me sometimes, in terms of watching movies that maybe I don't know if I want to buy yet. Even though I do like, quote unquote, collecting physical movies, I don't want to buy movies that I don't think I'm going to rewatch personally. So digital, like streaming, allows me to know if I like a movie or not. And in terms of which ones I use Netflix, I use Amazon Prime, and I use HBO. And it's interesting because Amazon Prime was not great.
Nah.
It was not great. They had a couple of good shows, like The Man in the High Castle, I think was always really good. But now that there's a whole bunch of things going on in terms of the US and how many other streaming services they have, like Hulu and Disney Plus and all these other ones, there's no equivalent in terms of the platforms here in Mexico.
Yeah.
And Amazon Prime has been really smart in negotiating the deals. So most of what's on Disney Plus is on Amazon Prime here in Mexico. And that's just like one example of how their library has began to grow really, really well. because I thought about canceling it for a while there, and then I just started noticing there were so many movies,
Right.
and movies that I'm interested in watching, you know, because I don't give a fuck if you have a bunch of movies, but if I don't want to watch them, then what's the point of me having your service? Um,
Maybe
in terms of
that's
quality, though,
maybe that's why I'm starting to lack an interest in Netflix, since Disney Plus is, I think it's gonna come here in November to Sweden. So Netflix is definitely not gonna have many. I mean, the deals of the Disney movies and shows are
Mm.
expiring, if anything.
Yeah, like I'm not gonna lie, I don't necessarily remember when was the last time I watched a movie on Netflix that wasn't a Netflix original movie, because I've because of the lack of recent releases
Mhm.
in theaters, there's a lot of stuff going straight to Netflix or straight to Apple TV and all that other stuff, which I think actually Apple TV Plus is an interesting to keep an eye on. It's an interesting one to keep an eye on because they have a fuck ton of money
Yeah.
that they are actually just willing to put behind a lot of creators. Right now, there's not a lot of stuff that I would say, oh, definitely get Apple TV Plus, to be honest. But I think it's interesting to see how it develops because there's a lot of rumors about interesting projects that they might actually turn into something really, really good. Um, but in terms of quality and Netflix original content, it's really hit or miss. It's really hit or miss, especially with their movies. I think
Yeah.
the shows have managed to find a nice, like, stable consistency of quality,
Mhm.
but the movies are just all over the place. There's a movie that just came out. It's called The Old Guard, and it has Charlize Theron in it, and it's like an action movie. And I there's something about Charlize Theron that makes me want to watch every single movie that she's in. So I watched it, and I thought it was always going to be a straight to Netflix movie. And then I heard recently that it was actually supposed to come out in theaters. And it's an interesting thing because I think I enjoyed it more knowing that it was a Netflix film that I watched here at home than if I had gone out to the movie theater and saw it.
Oh yeah.
I don't think I would have rated it as high, to be completely honest.
No, it's true. Like, naturally, the way you make movies differ if they're gonna end up on Netflix and solely Netflix. Um, but I do wonder, if I were to cancel Netflix, like if I were to miss some Netflix movie coming out, and then I wouldn't have a subscription, and neither would I be able to rent it. Maybe that would be a thing, because, you know, naturally most people have Netflix. That's why it's so accessible to everyone. So people talk about Netflix original shows all the time, and there might be some FOMO in that. But I don't enjoy the exclusivity. Netflix Plus, or Disney Plus, it's not something that I find too intriguing. Great for you if you love watching Disney classics. You're gonna have it all the time.
Here's the thing. I feel there's exclusivity right now because that's what's going to sell.
Yeah.
But because there's so many things coming out in terms of streaming services, I feel there's eventually down the line going to be this like one thing that's going to be like, we like pay us a fee and then you have access to all of this streaming services.
Yeah.
And then it'll become just like fucking basic cable
Yep.
again. But now it's online and you can access it anywhere.
It's the same old.
But no, I hate exclusivity. I honestly, one of the things that I think constantly about being from somewhere that is outside the US and even outside of Canada, because I think the US and Canada can kind of share a little bit more, just how copyright works and fucks over so many things that could just be easily accessible everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's just like a money thing. And you and I know a little bit more about it. It's solely about there being a system in place where there has to be a distribution scheme for the US and Canada, one for Latin America, one for Europe, and so on and so forth, that if you would be able to just take that away, because there's so much, like, the globalization process at this point is so big that you could probably take it away, but because it's such a business thing and a money thing, we're gonna fucked over. And and I don't like that. I don't like that at all.
No, I'm completely convinced that it's gonna follow the same trend as we saw with cable and everything, and then we're gonna get a backlash, and then people are gonna start pirating it again. I mean, I don't know people that pirate as much as they used to back then, but I'm definitely gonna see that gonna come back, and it's not the greatest, but it seems to be the only way that anyone is able to come up with.
I feel it's going to be a thing solely because of the fact that there's going to be so many of them, and all of them have their own like exclusives. Then you're kind of like in this space where it's like you are going to have your favorite ones, and those are the ones that you're going to be willing to spend your money on, and then another one is going to pop up and have its own exclusive and something that you really, really want to watch because everyone's talking about it, but you're not going to be able to put or don't want to put the money into it. And so you're just going to revert to old habits, I guess. But I think you're right. I feel like if you were to talk to someone who's like 14 years old about the idea of like a LimeWire or like a Pirate Bay, it would be so foreign to them.
Yeah.
That might just be me underestimating the newer generations, but I think they actually don't know because they never had the need for it.
Yeah, I mean, streaming is great and all, but it's only a question of when it's going to be oversaturated to the point. It would be interesting though to see sort of like fanboys like we see now with Marvel and DC, but instead Hulu versus Netflix, and people only committing to Netflix and some only committing to Hulu, and battling of who's got the best shows. Wow,
for sure.
Future, man, terrifying. I'm telling you.
Yeah. There's people saying that we've reached the end of the SimCity simulator, where all we get right now are disaster after disaster after disaster.
Sweet. Soon the robot is gonna come in. That was always my favorite of those destructions. Big ass robot, bulky as hell.
So what's your recommendation of the week, Algot?
My recommendation of the week is a weird one, a funny one. I'm going to recommend a TikTok. And yes, I am 16 years old. By the username Tall, Dork, and Handsome in one word. You've seen the TikTok before. Let me show it quickly to the audience.
Say what again? Say what again? I dare you. I double dare you, motherfucker. Say what one more goddamn time. He's black. Go on. Does he look like a bitch? What?
And for the audio listeners, of course, you recognize the sound clip from Pulp Fiction, but they're simply playing a game of Guess Who, and it's hilarious. You should totally check out Tall, Dork, and Handsome. He's one of those funny sketch guys on TikToks. So that's my recommendation. I just enjoyed the film homage when I saw it for the first time, and it's one of my absolute favorites.
I feel the more that we've gotten into quarantine, the more TikTok comes up in our episodes. And I feel mostly everyone who listens to us can relate to the feeling of like a bit of shame, about how much we actually enjoy being on TikTok as older people.
Older people. No, there's a thing as 20-year-olds being on a TikTok at like, I now understand how old people on the internet feel, and it's hurting a bit, but it's okay. I'm never interacting with the TikToks. I'm just enjoying them in my own corner.
Yeah.
It's a good one though. You should totally check it out. What's your recommendation of the week?
My recommendation of the week is I'm trying to keep it within the context of of the movie we're going to be talking about later.
Oh, interesting.
So erotic thrillers is something that was a thing from the late 80s to the early 2000s. That was as big as it got for them. But there's been a couple of newer filmmakers, more recent films that kind of dabble within the same genre. A lot of people would say that Gone Girl is an erotic thriller of sorts, which if you haven't seen, what are you doing? That movie's amazing. Um, but I am trying to keep it a little bit fresh, a little bit different. I think people are starting to get into foreign film a little bit more. We could say that Parasite has a little bit to do with that. Um, so if you're into Basic Instinct and you want to watch what a really kind of master filmmaker can do with this type of movie, or within this genre, my recommendation is The Handmaiden. It's a 2016 movie. It's directed by Park Chan-wook. He is a Korean filmmaker, and he's really, really good. He did Old Boy, for those of you who have heard of that movie, which is also really, really good. Um, and it's a dark movie. It's a very twisty movie. It has a lot of ups and downs. It has an erotic aspect to it, different than this because different sensitivities, different cultures. But it's definitely worth checking out. I don't want to say more about it because I think it's a type of movie that you should walk into without knowing what the hell is going on. And yeah, if you for some reason saw Basic Instinct and enjoyed it, I think you could give The Handmaiden a try and thank me later.
It's not necessarily one of those that have a extremely happy ending. I guess none of them necessarily are.
Yeah,
but it's a good one. I like how you're always so timid about spoiling movies too much.
I think it's because recently I've really truly enjoyed not knowing what a movie is about, because there's nothing like there's nothing out there that tells us, oh, like these new movies are coming out and stuff. Like this movie that I told you about, the Netflix original one. I knew nothing about it until I turned on Netflix and it was like right there, and I saw Charlize Theron on it, and I was like, I want to watch this right now. So let's get into the movie of the week. How's that?
Let's get sexy.
Welcome back to the Velvet Hour, and with me is Alex Cummings. I am your host, Nikki Backslap. Thank you for joining us tonight. We're talking about Basic Instinct, steamy, sexy, all around, kind of rapey movie.
Oh yeah.
In 1992, directed by Paul Verhoeven. It stars Michael Douglas and Sharon Stone in the main roles. And the movie is about a police detective who is in charge of an investigation of a very brutal murder in which a beautiful and seductive woman could be involved. That is the official synopsis.
Sexy. Oh.
What did you think about this movie, Alka?
I think it's a pretty concise thought, non-spoilery as usual. This movie hasn't aged well.
Interesting.
There's a lot of nudity. It definitely doesn't pass the Bechdel test, even though that's not the greatest test. Naturally, it doesn't pass it regardless. It's very objectifying of the women that are. And I think every single woman on screen, that's not true, there's some female cops, but every woman that we see and have a connection with is seen completely nude. So it hasn't aged well. Let's just get out of the way. On top of that, though, that's really how it catches you. Like, there's obviously this male audience, and there's a lot of sex in the first part. But similar to a lot of other movies in this theme, in this genre, in this vein, that's how they catch you. That's how they intrigue you, and then the story actually develops, and it's actually pretty good. It's kind of interesting. It has some pretty good turns. I mean, it's not Silence of the Lambs. It's not Silence of the Lambs, but it's good. It's okay. It's it's your typical detective story from that era. It just have a lot of skin, and you know how I feel about it. We'll talk more about it later. That's basically that.
Okay, so you would recommend it then?
If you're able to look past the poor aging of the film, it is worth a watch. Yeah, I mean the what you want to call it, the interrogation scene is iconic, nevertheless. So for that reason solely, watch it. It is a good watch. It is, but be aware that there are some parts of it that just hasn't aged well, as expected with a movie that is this bold. Simply,
Yeah. So basically, it it's kind of what people would say the peak of this subgenre that exists, or existed, more like it. I don't think it's really something that is made at all today. It's one of those genres that kind of died, like many other genres that have maybe taken new life nowadays, but you don't really see westerns anymore.
Yeah.
Or erotic thrillers like this movie was. And I have a couple of let's call them fun facts. So an erotic thriller is basically defined as a thriller that has a basis thematically in an illicit romance or like erotic fantasy. Obviously, because of this nature, most films in this category contain scenes of sex and nudity. But the frequency and explicitness of said scenes is up to the filmmaker, which in this case, Paul Verhoeven has never been one to shy away from the graphic nature of life, I guess, or of his movies.
That's one way to put it. Yeah.
Like his movies don't shy away from nudity or violence. RoboCop or Total Recall. Starship Troopers has violence that I remember.
It's very gory.
Yeah. So the genre kind of like became a thing in the late 80s, but it wasn't until 92 with this movie that, first of all, the bar was set. This is probably one of the best ones, if not the best one you're going to find in this genre. And then this was in 92, and the genre kind of existed up until the early 2000s, and then it kind of just died away. But even in that short span of time, there is supposedly around 300 of these movies, like, which sounds insane to me, but at the same time, it feels like the 90s were the type of, on the one hand, you had like this indie film festival thing movement going on and starting to move the studio system that was in place. But I can understand how people saw this movie and then studios were like, we have to make more of these. Like,
it's
sex sells.
Dude, it sells. Of course it does.
Yeah.
It sells
so
well.
That's just some fun facts for you guys in terms of what this movie is. I agree with you in the sense that there's things that haven't aged well. There's a definite let's call it focus on what would a male audience member like take away from this film, for sure. From what I understand, though, this was also very much a thing that women were into, in the same way, like you said, that 50 Shades of Grey is now a thing. And I feel like realistically, for 50 Shades of Grey to be like the movie adaptation to have been, I don't know, a proper thing in terms of its adaptation, it should have taken this path more than the weird whatever the fuck happened there.
Yeah, but I also do believe that that kind of era of films have passed, so it wouldn't sell. It makes sense to me that 50 Shades as the adaptation is what it is and isn't a sexual thriller or erotic thriller.
Well, here's the thing, though. From what I understand, because I've not seen the movies and I have not read the books, but from what I understand, the books are way more like Basic Instinct than their own movie adaptations in tone, and that sold a lot. I really think it was more like they were trying to market it as this like romantic ideal, like it comes out in February and whatever the fuck thing, because they thought that would sell better.
Valentine's Day.
Apparently it did sell well. I don't know why I'm saying, like it did sell well. It sold a bunch of shit. In terms of if I would recommend the movie, I really enjoy thrillers. I am a sucker for a really good thriller. I think obviously David Fincher is the person who does them the best. at this time. But Paul Verhoeven did a really good job with this. It's well written for the most part. For the most part, there's a couple of things where I'm like,
Yeah.
that's 90s things. It has good turns and good twists within it, and I think Sharon Stone and Michael Douglas do an amazing job selling these two characters. So yeah, if you can get over the very graphic nudity that some people might have an issue with, watch it. I think it's worth watching. I think it's a good time.
But
It's really
simply that, be aware, but it is what it is. The acting is great and writing much so. Other than, pure sexual enticing scenes, I feel like the rest of the movie is also very interesting, and it captures you pretty well, even when there is less sex further down the movie as it progresses. So it's probably mostly, as a filmmaker, it's pretty much of a gimmick and a marketing trick in many ways. I mean, just look at the cover art of the sequel of this film. It's literally legs. That's it. So
there's a sequel to this film?
Apparently a sequel. That was news to me as well.
Oh man, the studios do take away everything.
Right. So
that makes no sense.
Spoilery section. Any closing thoughts?
No, just go watch it if you enjoy thriller movies. I think it's a good thriller. I think it's solid. And this is your official spoiler warning for a movie that I really do think, if you haven't seen, you should probably stop and go watch it, because it's really just a fun one to sit through. But yeah, we're going to get into the spoilers, all the good, all the bad. Starting with the opening scene of this movie, which, as you all know, I watched this movie with my brother. Because I feel like we've watched a lot of type of movies, but this was a new experience for him, I believe. Like, I'm not, like, what I mean is I think he's seen Gone Girl.
Yeah.
And Gone Girl is definitely very much, at least the scene in Gone Girl, which is now kind of famous as well, is definitely inspired in this.
I'm thinking
you can say otherwise, but it definitely has to be, because it's exactly the same thing that happens, where it's like there's a couple, they're having sex.
Ooh, sweet, sensual
very
sex.
very steamy intercourse. And
there's no, like, as you normally see in Hollywood movies, where the blankets are perfectly covering everything. It's just skin, very nude and waxed and probably oily skin.
Yeah, and here's what I was going to say about the cinematography, and we can talk about it later a little bit more. But everything seems very moist, and I'm sorry for those people who don't like that word. I apologize for
moist?
Being so close to your ears. Moist. Yeah. But doesn't it, like, even in the non-sexy scenes, everything is kind of like damp, and
especially
just like
in the latter parts, where with the main character, his hair is just like perfectly roughed up and kind of. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, but
I guess it is an erotic thriller after all.
Yeah, and I feel like you said, to a certain point, maybe the whole sexual side of this is a gimmick, but I will also say that it's very interesting how this movie was it was made in the 90s.
Yeah, true.
Which was also kind of like a weird conservative era. I think here's the thing about sex in movies in the US mostly. It's weird. It's never good. It's never necessarily really well made, because of this whole like taboo about sex that exists for some reason. And I think the fact that Paul Verhoeven is Dutch, it adds to this movie in ways that maybe other filmmakers didn't know how to handle. Because sure, it's dated, and sure, sometimes it feels like it's a softcore porn, but at the same time, I think it's handled better than in other movies.
Yeah, 100%.
And because this didn't necessarily come with like the wave of movies that happened, like this was before it got popular, I would say it served a purpose to a certain extent. You know, I feel like maybe at the time it was trying to push boundaries and trying to have a conversation about certain things. Did it handle it properly? Not really. But yeah, I think it's interesting to kind of put it into context with when it came out. But I think here's the interesting aspect of it. This is definitely for shock value, right?
Yeah.
Because we're supposed to look into this scene and it's like it's a hot sex scene, and then all of a sudden she pulls out an ice pick and stabs the living shit out of the dude. And it is also just kind of you're just sitting there,
Yeah.
you know, and it's like, oh, that guy's dead.
I feel like
Like,
it sets it up very nicely.
yeah.
Because you have the two extremes, and knowing that he was the same director as RoboCop, I didn't necessarily expect it, but it was a welcome. What you call it? It was welcoming to see this like bloody gore. They're not hiding anything when it comes to the
Yeah.
murders, which I
And
appreciate.
here's
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it looks good.
And what I like about it, yeah, so it looks good. It holds up in terms of like the graphic aspect of it, like how the effect looks. And what I enjoy about it is that there's some thought put into it, you know, because there are sex scenes into the movie, like further into the movie, that are similarly edited,
Yeah,
and they are supposed to be leading us on. They're supposed to catch us thinking, oh wait, is this like that first one that we watched? Is this the time that we
Mm.
relive that moment?
same
of, like,
movements, same action, same camera and audio on top of that.
Yeah, exactly. Which I really I enjoy the shit out of the score by Jerry Goldsmith. I think it's really, really good. I think it's kind of very fitting to the movie, and it's just fun how it helps pull you into the movie, and you're just in this kind of state of intrigue and constant suspense, I think, at least in my case. So after that scene, we are introduced to Michael Douglas, and he is the police detective who we're going to be following for most of the film. He gives a really good performance as someone who's conflicted, as someone who's like trying to be a better person, but constantly gets pulled back into like the old habits that he's always had.
Yeah.
And you kind of start seeing the dialogue for the first time, and I feel like the opening, like when he gets to the murder scene, there's some really good dialogue in the sense of like, it's the rock star is dead and people are there, and there's a guy from like the mayor's office, and he's like, we need to do this quietly and carefully, because he was a respectable civil rock star who really supported the mayor. And they were all like, oh, he was respectful and civil. Okay, so that over there on his bed, that is some respectable civil cocaine.
Yeah, like throughout the film with the cops, there's a very true dynamic between them all. There's conflict and heated debates, as well as, you know, that casual, jokingly humor that cops have in. So it stays true to real life in that sense, definitely.
And I feel like throughout the mystery part of this movie, I feel a very Hitchcockian vibe, you know. And I don't know if you felt this through any of the movie, but it kind of started to remind me a little bit of Vertigo by Alfred Hitchcock, in
Okay.
the sense of,
Yeah,
you know, this mysterious, seductive blonde woman who is just, to a certain extent, playing with the main character, and how and how the plot is.
Now, when you say it, yeah,
done.
sure. Are you even thinking to the point of there's quite a few car scenes, chase scenes, and shadowing other cars?
Isn't Vertigo also in San Francisco?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I don't know.
It sounds accurate. I'm unsure.
Yeah. So then we are taken to meet Sharon Stone, and turns out it's not Sharon Stone, it's her friend Roxy, which we find out later is her lesbian lover. And here's the thing, okay? Here's my, I think one of the things that I don't enjoy about the movie is how, like, and we can talk about this later.
Okay.
When so after they meet Roxy and she's like, you're looking for, what's her name, Catherine. Roxy tells them, you're looking for Catherine, you should go to her beach house, she's there, whatever the fuck. So they go to the beach house, she's waiting for them, she's having a cigarette, which again, the thing about older movies is that I just like how smoking looks on film, and I think it's really cool. That's a side point. So she's there, they start interrogating her, and they're like, how long have you been dating? How long have you been with this guy? And she's like, I was not dating him, I was fucking him. And she kind of describes their dynamic as the fact that she's a writer, she's a book writer, and she just uses these men for inspiration for her characters. And one of the, I think it's Michael Douglas's partner who goes, that's kind of cold, lady, about how she just uses them. But that's kind of like, I hate the double standard of a woman can't be, let's call it sexually liberated without her being cold and a slut. And then if it's a gay person, if it's a gay man or a gay woman who has a lot of sex and who's like sexually active, then they're deviants. But if it's a dude, then it's normal. Yeah. Then it's just a dude being a dude.
Yeah, and we see that a bit in Nick's character, the main character, how he is a very masculine guy, aggressively so, and is using sex and straight up
booze and drugs.
Yeah. No, but how he himself is able to persuade women, but we don't, like, from the way it's shot, we don't see the negative aspects of that, as you're saying, that we directly get the comment that Catherine's character is in the wrong. So there's definitely, within the film itself, there's that correlation between the two. And the double standards, as you're saying.
So Sharon Stone's character, Catherine, overall, I think she's probably as good as you're gonna get in an older movie when it comes to a female, like
acting wise.
No, acting wise, but like in representation wise, in having a strong female character. Sure, she's supposed to be, quote unquote, the supposed killer, but as far as like female characters go in that era, like at least she's a little bit more fleshed out. And there, as the movie goes on, it starts to be this thing of like, oh, maybe she's just like, actually, she's just messed up by the fact that her parents died. Maybe she's not the murderer, which I think actually is really well done.
And she's always in control of the situation. She's always the one in power of the other, still in a sexually driven way. But yes, in the era and for the time, it is probably holds up pretty good.
If you take into account RoboCop, for example, as Paul Verhoeven's like movie, RoboCop is trying to say something about society, about American society, about how the policing worked, and I think to a certain extent, this movie might have been trying to say something as well in how sex is power, and everything about power has to do with sex. And that kind of dynamic. And I feel like you said, Catherine is always in control of every scene she's in. It's insane. And I feel like Sharon Stone might have been underused at that time because she was really a beautiful woman. So they didn't give her more roles like this where she could have like showed, more of her acting prowess. Not that she didn't before, or that she never did it. I'm just saying, because of the time, she didn't get a lot of that.
And truly not knowing anything about it, I can definitely see how the director, being European and outside of the Hollywood system originally, I assume, I'm not too sure actually, is able to bring that to the table within the Hollywood system, whereas traditionally you wouldn't even go to as far, but he's able to sneak those into the writing and characters and everything to actually have these small points. As I said before, like the beginning of the movie is not, I'm not sure if it's as fleshed out, but it definitely doesn't seem as it. It more or less serves the purpose of enticing the audience with raw sexual and private parts of showings.
Mm-hmm.
And then later the movie really is in its true light later on.
Yeah, it's...
Go ahead.
No, please, after you, sir.
So can we move on to the scene, my favorite scene? Not my favorite scene. Well, the most iconic scene from this film. Okay. The interrogation scene. Naturally, Catherine having been the one that is seen last with the victim and dating, quote unquote, him actively, in her words, fucking him. They take her down for interrogation, and yeah, there's the power play, and she's definitely in power. She seems to be targeting our main character Nick quite some, partially by offering him cigarettes, etc. But then we have the, as I would like to call it, the cooch shot. So she has very long and beautiful legs. Previously, we've established that she doesn't wear underwear, and she has a dress on. And I forget necessarily what the moment is when she switches her legs on top of the other.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I don't ever think that I've seen a movie, definitely not an American movie, where you actually see some cooch. No?
Yeah, it's always kind of hidden.
I mean,
it's interesting how they're like...
It's probably just because it's the female organ and not a penis, because we've seen penises before. We've definitely seen boobs before. That's nothing new. Considering it's from the 90s, even more so. It's just like shot up in between her legs.
And I feel like here's the interesting thing about Paul Verhoeven being European. It's like he does show that, but he's also not, like, he doesn't shy away from the male nudity of it.
Mm-hmm.
And because we also see some dick.
Is it
right?
more
like,
than the victim there? That's the only dick I remember.
Yeah. Really?
That's the only dick I remember, yeah. Just blooded up.
No, so you see the victim's one for sure, because he dies while having an orgasm, which...
Good way to go.
Yeah, props to the dude. But we see Michael Douglas's dick as well.
Do we?
The first time that him and Catherine have sex.
Okay. I mean, we see his ass a multitude of times. Kudos to
his
him.
Lack of ass. But sure.
I don't know. I don't mind it. He is a bit asymmetrical, I guess, with the upper body. But it's an ass. I'm not complaining. There's just straight up a lot of naked bodies.
Well, I think that's kind of part. I think that's part.
It plays into it, yes.
Sure. Okay, so apparently, when this movie came out, it was strongly opposed by gay rights activists who criticized the film's depiction of homosexual relationships and the portrayal of a bisexual woman as a murderous psychopath.
And
I can see that
it's very fetishized. Fetishized.
Yes.
What is that word?
Fetishized.
Just the two lesbian relationships, or there's
I feel
multiple.
Like here's why I feel like you're right, and in the fetishism of it, like Roxy is the quote unquote fantasy ideal,
stereotypical
of a lesbian.
Oh no, I see what you say. Yeah,
you know, like she's a hot woman, a hot blonde woman
in high heels,
who dresses kind of like a little bit like a tomboy, not really, but like sure, in whatever way. Like I understand, like you said at the beginning of this, there's aspects of it that haven't aged well. I do like the fact that it's never kind of like addressed. Like I yes, it's not aged well, and yes, it's not the best depiction of a bisexual person, but I'm just saying, like, sometimes it's nice when it's like, oh, you know, she's into women or she's not into women. I just like the fact that it's not a big deal.
I guess she is, but at some point I kind of questioned her sexuality, especially with the relationship with Roxy.
Yeah, and here's why it's not handled properly, I guess. It's like, she doesn't seem like the bisexual type. It feels like it's just there to entice men who are into girl on girl stuff.
I from a
Yeah.
film perspective, yes.
Because Roxy's not even like that. Like she's just there, and there's like really nothing. Like even the little things that they are trying to put in. Like first of all, you never really think that Catherine cares for her until
No.
like she dies,
Yeah.
and then she cries for her, and you're like, so I guess she cared for her. And the whole
Or
she
did
liked
she?
watching
Yeah.
thing, it's weird. There's anyways, like you said, I feel like what really works about this film is how you start to see this cat and mouse dynamic
Hmm.
being established. And even though you want to agree with Michael Douglas as like, oh, he's the main character and he's supposed to be the one that's like smarter and he's supposed to be the one that's, you know, in power per se, he never is. And this is established from this second. Like, she knows more about him. She, to a certain extent, knows how to play him better than he does her. And even though when he kind of switches it up and he tries to kind of be at the same level with her, you kind of feel how she even adapts to that. And she's like, you're never going to beat me because I'm better at this than you are, you know? Which I think brings us to the real question, jumping a little bit. Who do you think the killer is?
At this point of time, or
Just overall.
overall?
Yeah.
That's where I really enjoy the storytelling aspect. That's because other than just pure sex, I was myself very enticed in who the killer was, like a good thriller or detective story should be. And it really went back and forth. Originally, naturally, you would suspect Catherine because you don't really know anyone else. And then Roxy comes into the picture, and Roxy's attempting to kill Nick. That's never really the biggest suspect. But I feel like the way that Beth is seen very early on with her relationship with Nick, she was always a suspect of mine up till the point, just because, you know, conclusions.
Yeah, just because like everyone in the movie should be a suspect, because it would be a shitty movie if it's like someone you've never heard about throughout the movie and it says, but that's the guy.
Yeah, I guess it kind of falls into the movie's fault, but we know for a fact that it is a female. There was no hiding that committed the murder.
Yes.
And there is 3 female characters, so it's one of the 3. So I always suspected Beth. Not so much when it comes to the point of Beth and Catherine actually having had a past, maybe not relationship, but a history, and or they knew each other. And as we spend more time with Catherine and she's starting to reveal things about Beth, we realize that Beth knows Catherine better than we originally thought. But then I was won over back on Beth's side and suspected Catherine around the end of it. But all in all, I definitely think that Beth was the killer.
Oh, okay. All right. I think the movie's very well, like it handles the story very well because we don't necessarily know. And that is something that I didn't expect. Like I thought this movie was going to be straightforward in the sense of like Catherine's the killer.
Same.
And it's just about how she's smarter than the rest of them, and that's why she kind of has all the power, and that's why she is able to do whatever it is that she's doing. So when you start to introduce this idea of like, holy shit, like maybe it wasn't her, you know, maybe there is the possibility of someone else doing it. I was like really into it, and obviously at that point, because the Roxy storyline could have been handled better in the sense of like we could have seen a little bit more of her dynamic, then maybe it would have been a little bit more believable that Roxy was like an actual suspect, because they tell us in the beginning that the person who killed the rock star is either the author of a book that kind of tells in detail the same murder, or someone who is obsessed with the author to the point of wanting to harm them and do something about it.
Yeah.
And I feel like the idea was for us to think that Roxy was in this like obsessive kind of toxic relationship with Catherine, that because of Catherine's habit of sleeping with other people as well, that's why she becomes kind of like murdery, I guess.
I mean, she has
towards
capability to murder. We get that established.
Yes. I had forgotten about that, but yes, you're right. I feel like if this were to be done again or rewritten in some way, I think in order for Roxy to be a true player of the game, she would have to be more like kind of drawn out as a character and show us that like obsessive nature that she quote unquote may or may not have.
Instead of just being a fetishized side character,
side piece.
She is.
Yeah,
she doesn't even add to the plot, and that's disturbing as a whole. Unfortunately,
yeah. But I feel like in terms of Lisa's character, I enjoy that we're never in the know of who she is properly, like how she behaves, what her personality is. And again, it could be a thing of not being properly written out. But there's this scene that right after Nick gets accused of killing the internal affairs officer, and she comes into the room and she kind of tells him like, I went to the apartment, I saw him, he was fine, he was sober, he was not a threat. He chases her down the stairs and he's like, thank you for helping me and this and that, and she seems very like cheerful, considering the whole like he was an asshole aspect of the night that she didn't tell them about. But she seems very like casual, and she's like, yeah, don't worry about it, and she's smiling and all of this, and then she gets into her car and her whole expression changes. So good. And I'm like, okay, so what's your deal though, right? Like, because we get the idea that she broke up with him, right? But then she's also the one who's like, oh, I missed you, and she keeps trying to like interact with him and have these like situations with him. So I feel like that eventually, when you start suspecting her, adds to it, where it's like, is she actually the type of person who latches onto someone and is obsessive enough to do this type of stuff, right? And
it makes me question her last words as she is seen on the scene of Nick's partner's stabbing by an ice pick, and Nick ultimately shoots Beth, and she says,
which I think, I think that's the the campiest scene in the movie, surprisingly so.
I think it
like
works,
it looks
but
very
sure.
It looks very like slasher, like B-filmy, like this like hooded figure that comes out of nowhere, and it's like
and the elevator stops on every floor.
Yeah,
I didn't think much of it in the moment.
No, but and here's the thing, and here's what the movie does really well, and I'll let you keep going because I totally interrupted you, but I feel the movie works really well when you think about how the first and the second act are so well made and are properly, they suck you in properly, and you're intrigued by everything that's going on, that when you get to the third act and things start to get a little bit messy in terms of like storytelling and conclusion and wrapping things up, that you're just in it and you kind of believe it. You're the suspension of disbelief has been achieved, and you're just like, yeah, I'm in for the ride. Like, I won't think about it much.
And there's a bit of play of genres, as usually thrillers or detective thrillers mostly do. That it is slightly more romantic in the beginning, and then it becomes darker and darker, and ultimately you have to have a conclusion, preferably with a lot of blood and gore. About Nick's and Beth's relationship, though, her last words as Nick shot her is "I love you," which makes you question, like, was she obsessing about Catherine? That was my first assumption, but maybe it's more of a just trying to get back at her and disguise her being the murderer and having her convicted of such for her to ultimately be with Nick. Since she's doing and going out of her way so much to cover up for Nick in all of these cases. I assume.
Yeah, and I feel like,
which is partially why I suspect her being the murderer, mostly.
I think it could be way more about her trying to get back at Catherine over the like she was obsessed with her scenario. Again, because some of the things are not necessarily really fleshed out. We don't really know. And I don't think we're supposed to know at this point. I think what it's trying to be is vague enough for us to draw our own conclusions. I think when it comes to who was the real killer, I can see it being Beth for sure, or Lisa, however you want to call her. But if that's that, right? Because at this point of the movie, we see that Beth is like, she has the gun that's been used in 2 other murders. She has clippings of Catherine and her life. She has her books. She has all this damning evidence against her. Why pull that whole like stunt with Catherine having a nice pic with her while in bed with Nick in that final scene, right? Like, because if it was just tacked on to put doubt into us as an audience member, then it's cheap, right? And because if everything is so cleanly and nicely wrapped up, which is why I don't fully, that's where my doubt comes from, right? Because it's like everything is too neat. Everything is too neat for Beth to be condemned as a murderer.
Yeah, sure thing. Why would Catherine wear a wig though? Yeah. Maybe they're just in mascopy with each other, but it would be super cool for Nick to fall for the wrong woman, as they so lovingly put it.
And even on the other side of it, it's like, it would be interesting to think, oh, you know, Beth, who we thought was the normal one, is the murdery psychopath. And Catherine is just a really broken human being, you know, where it's like she actually just acts detached and aloof, as she says, because she can't allow herself to care about people because she feels that whoever she gets close to ends up dying.
Yeah.
You know, that would also be an interesting angle. And I think I appreciate the ability that we can have a bit of both.
So, sex in movies. Are you ready to touch that on with me?
Yeah.
We
can talk about, but before we talk about sex in movies, there's a scene where Catherine comes into Nick's apartment and she's like, do you have Coke? I love Jack Daniels with Coke. And he was like, I have a Pepsi in the fridge. And I literally, all I could think about was our conversation a couple of episodes ago, where it was like, no one drinks fucking Pepsi. Like, no one ever has said to me, like, I have a Pepsi, or like outside of a restaurant situation. You know what I'm saying? Like,
and I love,
so I was like, this motherfucker.
That her response is, well, it's not really the same, is it? And his response is, yeah, I guess so. But he's the guy who has Pepsi in his fridge. But he acknowledges it, and I respect that.
Yeah, he's a man who stands by his decisions.
Pepsi and Coke, that's not a thing. So
you wanted to,
ironically enough, being a European, I am very off-put by sex in movies, and I will try and summarize it as quick and sweet as possible, because you and I have had long and interesting conversation about this object, since we have pretty different opinions about it, eh?
Are we talking about sex on film or sex in general?
Oh, well, we've had more conversation about that. You're right. No, sex in movies, the depiction of making love on screen. I'm kind of put off by it, like in the sense of Game of Thrones and this movie, where you actually see them going at it. You know, it's great and all. Sex sells. I acknowledge it, but it's not art, right? If film is supposed to be art, if you're going for something a little bit more intellectual than just money in your pocket, then make it slightly more interesting. You can argue that there are some scenes in Game of Thrones where they're actually making love and it's not only sex. Most of it is just sex, and it works in huge favor of Game of Thrones marketing value.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like the same thing as this movie. Like you said, Game of Thrones started out, and if you look at it objectively, Game of Thrones had a way more sex and way more explicit nudity in the first scene, couple seasons, and I feel like it's definitely like it's kind of like that meme where it's like, I came here for the boobs, but I stayed for the dragons. But I feel like it definitely worked in the favor of the show, even though, supposedly we're in a more advanced time than the 90s. I think, sex still sells in the same way.
And if I doubt that was the idea from the start when they made the first season, much like I doubt that the first sex scenes in the movie is nothing but marketing and enticing the viewer to stay for the ride. But like, ironically of a twist, I would like to compare a good sex scene, in my opinion, to a good fight scene.
Okay.
So you have a good fight scene not a good fight scene. A bad fight scene would be something. I haven't even seen the most recent Fast and Furious, but I could imagine, Fast and Furious. Transformers are pretty good in this sense, actually, but there's a lot of them in Transformers as well, where it's just fight scenes and there's testosterone and there's blood and there's punches being thrown and it's super cool. But that's only a fight scene. It's a bad fight scene. It's a very high possibility that you've seen this video essay by Stefan Krosex. I'm not pronouncing that last name correctly. Apologize. But the video title is Pirates of the Caribbean Accidentally Genius. Part of his point in this video essay is that the first Pirates of the Caribbean is great in the sense they depict fight scenes, because he's specifically talking about the one where Jack Sparrow and William is his name, and they're in this windmill and stuff. They're fighting and they're talking while they're fighting, and there's the power play. They're even using visual assistance in this, where the characters are, I think they're just meeting for the first time, yet we know exactly the balance between the two, and at some points they're overtaking the others, etc., etc. Jackie Chan is great as this as well, where there is character growth and character development within the fight scene. That's a good fight scene. Fast and Furious is good for what it is, but it's one of those movies where you just turn off your brain and watch it. If you want to be a great filmmaker and do the best out of a fight scene, I would argue that there should be more character elements within it. It's hard to do. It's extremely difficult. Basically take all of that and apply it to sex scenes. And that's my point about sex scenes. I don't get it if it's not driving the story forward. Therefore, I don't mind sex scenes where they're simply cutting to daytime and that's it. We don't see much sex because there's no point, because it wouldn't drive the story forward or develop the character at all. In this movie specifically, they do a pretty good job, especially since we have the reoccurring action of the murder that we see initially. Even in the first scene with the murder, there is some plot development fairly efficiently and quickly, because there's the tension, the music aids extremely much with it, and then there's the murder and there's your plot. Later on, there's a similarity, and we have Nick's character being afraid for his life. Again, the music aids a lot with that. And even further down the road, we have Catherine's character starting to feel a little bit, I don't even know what, guilty, and there's some character development on her part. So I feel they succeed greatly with the sex scenes in particular. The fact that there's an excessive amount of skin, that's a different part of the conversation, but the sex scenes as their own definitely succeeds in my standard of a good sex scene. It definitely qualifies as a good sex scene, in my opinion. So that's my dragged out explanation of sex in movies to me.
I think sex in movies, and I was listening to a podcast that talks about this. Surprisingly enough, Letterboxd, which is a great platform. We're not sponsored by them, by the way. I think some people might feel like they're paying us for this. We would love it, but we're not sponsored by them. They have a podcast as well, and at some point during quarantine, they released an episode about erotic thrillers and the whole like idea behind them, and they discuss sex in movies and how you don't really necessarily see it anymore, especially not as explicitly, I would say, or at least as it's not that you don't see it. I feel like maybe it just moved into TV more. I think for some reason, like there's a little bit more there.
Could it be just as simple as a PG-R rating, that the system is different?
Yeah, for sure. And I think I'm the type of person who thinks of sex as something that can be definitely commercialized, and that it has definitely been commercialized and used in that type of way. I also feel there's movies where they are where sex is, like you said, part of a story, and I definitely agree that when that happens, it adds to the movie instead of detracting from it. I feel like like using sex as a selling point is cheap. It's the cheapest thing you could do.
But it works. It sells.
Yeah, of course it works. And I honestly, I understand that there's a business side to movies, and I've made peace with that. I think in terms of this movie and how it handles the sex scenes, I enjoy what you said about it being part of the plot. And I think that kind of is probably one of the reasons why this movie stands above the other erotic thrillers of that time, because it didn't have the sex scenes solely because of a selling thing. It had it because it was an intrinsical part of the movie. It was trying to depict a woman who was not afraid of her sexuality, who was not afraid of doing and speaking about it openly, and having sex scenes within that has to be a thing. And because of the game that she's playing with Nick, the sex scene, or the scene where they eventually actually have sex, is important to both of them, because it's like it's the turning point in their relationship, and in the sense of the game that they're playing. You know, like we all knew that it was leading there. We all knew that they were going to have sex. But even when they're having sex, it's about who has the power within that relationship. You know, and you see it when they try to overpower each other constantly. And in the end, it's her who has the power, and it's her who's like winning, quote unquote, because Nick is completely hypnotized by her and completely into her, and that's kind of the whole point that she wants to make. In terms of how it's handled cinematography wise, I think it's very male oriented. I feel like, here's how I would say that the sex scenes are necessary, and I appreciate their role within the story, but if it were up to me, I would have shot them differently. I feel like when it comes to sex in movies, very much like sex in actual porn, it's just not how it is. Like at all. And I understand that maybe a realistic depiction of sex might be boring, or might be a little bit too awkward for,
much like a fight scene.
For an erotic movie. Like you have to heighten certain things for camera, like you said, like with a fight scene. But at the same time, I feel like because it is a movie directed by a dude, and it is a movie that was a product of its time, I would say that in terms of the cinematography and how it was captured and the acting, I think could be handled better, in the sense of like, I don't know.
No, it's essentially,
like I said, like for me, it's like if you're making a movie about a sexually liberated woman and someone who is not afraid of doing all of these things, why are the sex scenes so male driven?
Mhm.
You know,
Mhm.
like it's kind of like a weird contrast for me. That's what I'm trying to
The
get at.
camera is always, I'm pretty certain, taking the place of the male gaze. There's multiple cases where we literally see Catherine stripping down naked from the perspective of the male, appealing to the male attraction of the female body. The Nick, what's his name? The actor?
Michael Douglas.
Yeah, apparently his body might not be the greatest to appeal to the female gaze, but I definitely.
But that's the thing, though.
The way it's portrayed is not the same.
It's not the same,
Yeah.
and I feel like the thing about Michael Douglas is that at the time he was like,
oh yeah,
he was very attractive to a lot of women, right? And that's why he wasn't like so many of these movies. He was in another one called Fatal Attraction. He was, I think he was in Body Double. I might be completely wrong, but the point is he made he made various of these type of movies because he sold a lot. He was the attractive dude.
All right.
Opposite all of these beautiful women. And like I said, like it's just about how you handle it, right? If the main sex, like if the point of the movie is to portray Catherine as this powerful entity and this powerful woman, why is it that when it comes to the sex scenes, she's the one who's objectified and she's the one that's like, you know, that's the switch around that I think would benefit from probably a female director, you know?
I guess the film, like the conclusion we come back to is that it is a product of its own time. Yeah. Unfortunately so. There's a lot of good things about it, but that some movies just age worse than others, definitely.
And I feel like as a movie, I think it's pretty commendable how a lot of the things hold up. I think the thriller aspect of it is really entertaining. I think it's really intriguing. I think the writing for the most part is really well made. The acting is amazing.
Whilst
there's definitely
other aspects are just extremely unacceptable to today's standards, and
they're just outdated. Right? They're outdated, and there's so many things that nowadays we're starting to be more comfortable around the idea of and not all of us. It's a slow process. It's a slow process, and like it's taking some time. But I feel like the idea of being comfortable with female sexuality and you know, the idea that of how to handle consent, of how to handle all these different topics that the movie touches upon, whether it liked it or not, it did touch on those themes
in better or worse ways.
So I think it definitely, like you said, this movie would not be made as it is today, but I think it is an interesting idea of how to remake this type of film. How would you reintroduce this genre? You know, like The Handmaiden does it a little bit, and you've seen The Handmaiden, and there's definitely still a little bit of like that male gaze that like that has this very like sex sells idea, but it also changes at least in terms of like a woman being in a relationship with a woman. It's not as fetishized, and it tries to be a little bit more emotional and not only sex driven. And I think that's really interesting. And
even more so, or even more to the extreme, like I do enjoy the comparison. That kind of stuck with me of Vertigo. It is not too far off of a similar movie. That movie has neither aged way too well.
And if you think about it, like if Hitchcock had not, like he had to deal a lot with censorship and with a lot of the restrictions that came with making movies within the system at that time. And that's why he relied a lot in sexual innuendo and these type of things that hid what he truly wanted to say. But if you look at a lot of his films, talking about Alfred Hitchcock, he was kind of a pervert, right? Like, and a lot of things point to him being a very interesting, quote unquote, more like weird dude when it came to women, and how he would like find a woman an actress, and he would become obsessed by this actress, and like he would have them like sign multiple movie deals because he only wanted to work with a specific actress for an amount of time. And they all had a type. They were all blonde, you know, like they were all blonde. They had a certain type of physique. And yeah, I feel like if Hitchcock had been doing movies in the 90s, there would be a lot more sex in his movies.
Oh, for sure. Unfortunately, the case with most filmmakers, especially from that era. Nevertheless, any closing thoughts on this movie?
I had a lot of fun with this movie.
Yeah.
And I was looking forward to talking about it with you because of what you said. Like, I feel culturally and personally, we have different points of view when it comes to sex in movies. Yeah. And I just thought it was going to be an interesting watch for both of us. I hadn't seen it, you hadn't seen it, and I enjoy when that happens on the podcast. I think we should probably try and do that more.
And for the record, even though I claim most of the sex scenes to be good sex scenes in comparison to others, I'm still squeamish by the long, like 5-minute drawn out sex scenes. I don't want to see that because I know the characters and their personality. That's their own private time. I'm not supposed to see this. That's wrong. So
yeah, for sure. And
it's conflicting.
And I understand it, right? And I feel like I just thought it would be interesting for us to touch upon this movie, and I think we got a really good conversation about it.
Yeah.
And I think what is really cool about getting to do this is just really seeing how film has evolved and how we have evolved in terms of like, you know, maybe had you seen this movie as a like teenager, like as a 12-year-old, as a 13-year-old, you would have been like, oh, this is the fucking greatest movie ever, because it's just about, you know, like you're in that headspace, unfortunately so, but you know, it is what it is. So I just think it's cool to sit down, watch a movie that I haven't seen and that has certain things about an era that you and I might not have been able to live through, and kind of grasp what the general thoughts about movie making were. And I think that's really cool.
I think it's important to know about movies and film and art and everything good, how it's a fact that everything ages. Some things ages better than the other in a multitude of aspects, but we should all be aware when we create that things age, and we should strive to make the best thing possible out of that, looking into the future as well as the current aspects and perspectives of the world. So when it comes to ratings of this movie, I am a little bit conflicted, naturally, by everything that we've been talking about. I feel like it deserves to be lesser rated, so because it hasn't aged too well. Then again, because of the way that the story is good. I wouldn't say amazing, but I feel like the filmmaking is pretty great. The story is good. The characters and especially the acting is just feels very down to earth. It would be cool to see the characters slightly more fleshed out. But I guess I would give it something like a 3.5 out of 5 will be my rating for this film.
Yeah, I think here's, like you said, the interesting part about rating a movie. There's so many things that come into play.
Yeah.
I really enjoy thrillers and detective stories. I'm kind of just like a sucker for them. And I feel like this is a really well constructed one for the most part. Like I said, the third act kind of falls apart a little bit. Rewatchability is also kind of played into it, and how much I enjoyed myself in the movie. Did I lose myself, or was I looking at my watch constantly? And all that shit. And, you know, I kind of want to give this a 4-star just because I really thoroughly enjoyed it. And I thought that it was just really fun, and it managed to get me completely immersed in it and the story, and I like the characters. There's things that haven't aged well, I agree. But we also talk a lot about, looking at a movie for what it is and what it was trying to do.
Yep.
Like we did with Shark Boy and Lava Girl, and like we've
Mhm.
done with other movies that are a little bit more, let's call them highbrow
Yeah.
than Shark Boy and Lava Girl. But I want to say that putting this into context of where this film was and what it was trying to do, I think I'm going to stick to a 4 out of 5 rating.
Absolutely.
I think Paul Verhoeven does a really good job. I think the acting is amazing. I really, really love the score. I think it's very much a standout for me in the sense of like it was just always there, and it was always helping the visual aspect of the film to go further. And
It's very, it's so
I enjoy it.
effective. Yeah.
And with that, our fellow lovers and fans, the Velvet Hour is over, and thank you so much for joining us on K96.1 for your hourly dose of sex, love, and steamy conversation. Alex Cummings, thank you so much for co-hosting this with me.
It's been a
Deeply
pleasure.
appreciate your input, bro.
Oh, no worries at all. It's been a pleasure, as always, Nick. Backslap.
Yeah, thank you very much. Our conversation's over, the cup of coffee's over, and do it for the love. How about you do the outro for us?
Oh, I would love to. My dear lovers, listeners, and frenemies, make sure to follow us on Letterboxd, where we post every other movie that we see in our spare time. Sexy, steamy, or just plain dirty movies will be posted and possibly reviewed on this glorious platform. You see our handles in the description or on screen right now. This has been me, Alex Cummings, and Nick Backslap talking about sexy movies on K96.1. Join us next time. Make sure to subscribe and follow to get a notification when we post the next episode.